You wake up, before coffee, before your phone, before you even fully realize you're awake, you put on underwear. You probably don't think about it. You've been doing it your entire life. Now imagine waking up tomorrow and realizing underwear simply doesn't exist. No elastic, no cotton, no briefs, nothing between you and your clothes. For most of human history, that was completely normal. So when did humans decide they needed something down there in the first place? The strange part is, we don't have one ancient document that tells us. Instead, we have three clues. One comes from DNA. One comes from a man who was frozen in ice for more than 5,000 years. And one was sitting inside the tomb of a teenage king. And together, they give us a surprisingly good timeline. The first clue is something you probably wouldn't expect. A parasite. Body lice are specially adapted to live in clothing, while head lice live on the scalp and hair. So researchers wondered something strange. When did these two populations become different? Researchers compared the DNA of head lice and body lice and estimated that clothing lice diverged from their head louse ancestors somewhere between roughly 83,000 and 170,000 years ago, with 170,000 years being one of the study's central estimates. That doesn't mean humans were wearing underwear 170,000 years ago. It doesn't even tell us exactly what they were wearing, but it gives us something incredibly important. Humans were probably wearing clothing tens of thousands of years before cities existed, before farming, and before anyone had written a single word about it. So, clothing is ancient. But underwear? That's where things get much harder. Because clothing can survive in the archaeological record. Underwear usually can't. A piece of hide left in the ground doesn't exactly have a great relationship with time. But then, in 1991, two hikers discovered something extraordinary in the Alps: a human body, frozen in ice. This wasn't just some ancient skeleton. The body was so well preserved that archaeologists could actually see what this person had been wearing. His name became Ötzi the Iceman, and he lived roughly 5,300 years ago. Among his clothing was something very interesting: a loincloth, a piece of animal hide worn between the legs and secured around the waist. In other words, we finally have direct physical evidence of something functioning as underwear, and suddenly, the mystery gets a lot more interesting. Because Ötzi wasn't wearing some bizarre one-off invention. The basic idea of the loincloth appears again and again throughout human history. Ancient Egyptians used loincloth-style garments. Romans had the sublegaculum. In Japan, the fundoshi served a similar purpose. Different cultures, different continents, different thousands of years. Yet humans kept arriving at roughly the same solution. Take a piece of material, put it between your legs, tie it around your body, problem solved. But then comes an even stranger piece of evidence: Tutankhamun. When archaeologists opened the tomb of the teenage Egyptian pharaoh in the 1920s, they discovered an enormous collection of clothing and textiles. Among the burial goods were around 145 linen loincloths. Think about that for a second. Tutankhamun was buried with gold, jewelry, weapons, furniture, chariots, and a ridiculous amount of underwear. A teenage pharaoh was preparing for the afterlife, and apparently even the afterlife required a respectable wardrobe. But this raises a bigger question. Why did humans start wearing these things at all? Most of us would probably guess one obvious answer: modesty. Maybe ancient humans simply didn't want everyone seeing everything, but that might be getting the story backwards. Archaeologist Ian Gilligan has argued that clothing originally developed primarily as protection from the environment, especially cold, rather than beginning as a symbol of modesty. And that idea makes a strange amount of sense. Imagine living thousands of years ago. You're walking across rough ground. You're hunting. You're climbing. You're sitting on rocks. You're moving through forests. You don't have modern fabric. You don't have padded clothing. You don't have synthetic materials. If you can put a piece of hide between your body and the environment, suddenly it isn't just about covering yourself. It's equipment, protection, comfort. Ancient humans may not have been thinking, society says I need underwear. They may have been thinking, that hurts less. And once humans discovered that a simple piece of material could make life more comfortable, the idea was incredibly useful. The materials changed, the shape changed, the way people tied and wrapped them changed. But the basic idea survived. And there's another important distinction here. We can estimate when humans were probably wearing clothing. We can find actual ancient underwear. But we can't identify the exact moment when the first human ever put on the first loincloth. That probably happened long before anyone was around to record it. And whatever that first loincloth was made from may have completely disappeared. Which means the oldest underwear we can find probably isn't the oldest underwear that ever existed. It's simply the oldest evidence that survived. And this is where the story eventually reaches the underwear you know today. For thousands of years, underwear remained surprisingly simple. Hide, linen, wool, woven fibers, a strip of material tied or wrapped around the body. Then technology started changing the game. Elastic became increasingly useful in clothing during the 19th century. And in the 1930s, the modern brief began to take shape. In 1934, Coopers developed a close-fitting brief that would become associated with jockey. The following year, it was introduced at Marshall Field's in Chicago and reportedly sold out quickly. Suddenly, underwear wasn't just something you tied around yourself. It could stretch, fit closely, support the body, and look much more like what we recognize today. But compared with the entire history of underwear, that's basically yesterday. So think back to that parasite for a second. A tiny insect helped scientists estimate when humans probably started wearing clothing. Then, a man frozen in an alpine glacier showed us what an actual loincloth looked like more than 5,000 years ago, and a teenage pharaoh showed us that by ancient Egypt, underwear was already established enough to be packed into a royal tomb by the dozens. So, when did ancient humans start wearing underwear? We don't know the exact date, and that's actually the most honest answer. We have evidence that humans were probably wearing clothing by somewhere around 170,000 years ago. We have direct evidence of an actual loincloth being worn as underwear at least 5,300 years ago. And the real beginning probably happened somewhere in between, or even earlier than the surviving evidence suggests. The first underwear is lost to time, but the idea survived. The fabric changed, the shape changed, the elastic is new, the briefs in your drawer are new. But the basic idea: take something, put it between yourself and the world. Make life a little more comfortable. That idea is thousands of years old. And the weirdest part is, you probably put on the latest version of it this morning without giving it a second thought. If this is the kind of everyday thing you never realized had a history this old, subscribe. That's basically the whole channel.